Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people from all walks of life. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is a para-romance author. She's going to share how she decided on this genre of writing and what types of books she has coming up. She's also going to talk about constructive criticism and how you can make sure it's a positive in your life and that you're not taking it personally. Please help me welcome Margaret Izard. Margaret, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. And, I'm really excited because we have had a couple minutes already to chat offline before we started recording. And I love you already. So I'm stoked that I get to spend the next, half hour or so with you.
Well, good. I'm excited too. This is going to be so much fun.
It is going to be fun. And I know I'm going to tease the audience a little bit that you have a lot to say. So I'm already thinking about part 2 in my head, just to put that out there. I know the audience is going to want to hear it because one session is not going to be enough. But to kick us off for this first session, I would love it if you would tell the audience a little about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Margaret Izard. I actually live in Houston, Texas. I am the mother of adult triplets. I am a paranormal romance writer writing with Wild Rose Press. My first book, Stone of Love, came out on March 4th. The following second book is coming out in June 12th. My third book will come out October 21st, and the first of the Christmas companion novels will come out November 4th. So I'm very excited about sharing the first part of my 7-book series, Stones of Iona, with everyone. And I'm very happy to be here with Claudia King.
Thank you.
Sure.
So many places to start. I'm going to start with what I'm betting other people are thinking about, and that is paranormal romance. So a lot of us, I'm sure, have heard of romance, and we think of the guy on the cover with the flowing hair.
Fabio.
Right.
Mr. Fabio. The old Fabio covers. I love those.
Yes. So tell me, first off, what is paranormal romance? And then I want to hear a little bit about how you got into that.
Well, paranormal romance is romance stories that have some kind of magical elements to them, whether it's something that's supernatural, something that happens from nature, whether it comes from the environment, whether it comes from something whether it's even extraterrestrial, can even be a little bit paranormal. In my particular books, it happens with fairies. Whereas the Fae, because they actually take place in Scotland. And so I actually combine a lot of folklore and fables from Scotland, stories about the Fae and the magic of the Fae, and some of those old beliefs from Scottish folklore and history, and blend those along into some modern romantic stories. So it actually talks about a lot of true love, about how that's defined and how that comes about and how the Fae interact with that. So basically, my paranormal stories fall within magical realism, whereas the paranormal part or the fantastical part of what there is interacts with the world as we know it. So it comes within our world. We don't go into their world or into the Fae world. Well, we do a little bit in the books, but it actually interacts within the world as we know it, as in the humans live.
So what led you to that? What happened that when you sat down and said, I am going to write books, what made you say, and it's going to be paranormal romance?
Well, that's a really interesting story. It started when I started researching about the books. First off, I know I definitely wanted to write paranormal. I wanted something magical. I wanted to take these stories, specifically from my performing arts background. I have a very lengthy performing arts background. I started dancing when I was 3, acting when I was 8. I attended a performing arts high school here in Houston, an arts magnet school. Continued this on through college, owned a studio, ran a nonprofit dance company, danced during college, danced professionally with a professional ballet company. So all these wonderful stories and rich classic stories that were part of my dance and theatrical training, I really wanted to convey some of those stories of romance and love and kind of put a modern twist on them in our modern world. As I started researching the series, I wanted to base the series at a location. I wanted a physical location in which base the series, because that had a lot to do with how I wanted the stories to be told. When I read about the coronation stone, which is actually a stone that the king sits on when he goes through his coronation and is crowned. The queen sat on it, her father sat on it, et cetera, they date back to about the 15th, 16th century. When I read about the coronation stone traveling through the castle of Dunstafnage outside of Oban, Scotland, and going on to the Isle of Iona, I kind of hit me. I kind of went, well, wait, here's this great coronation stone that for centuries people have believed is magic. And it's really just a big, giant square rock. It's a big, huge square rock the size of the seat of a chair. That's all it is, and I've seen it. I actually visited it, seen it. They don't let you take pictures of it because I had my phone ready. I was going to take a picture, and there's a guard standing there, won't let you see it, but I won't let you take pictures. But I sat there and I said, what if the stone was really magical? What if it had magical properties, had these capabilities? And then, I read about the magic of Iona, and there's a marble that's part of half of the island of Iona, and they consider that it has magical properties. And so it just kind of melded into this concept and these ideas of, what if we had stones that were magic and they had powers, and I wanted to incorporate all these stories of the Fae, and I actually bring in the Tuatha De Danann and the Faramore, which are fables told in Ireland that were brought into Scotland. And so what if these Fae gave these stones to the humans had to guard them, but it's the humans' emotions that power the stones. And so once I started putting all these things together, it's like these stories just started firing off in my head of, there's this stone and there's that stone and this one does that and this one chases that. And there's, so it all just kind of came up and came forward. And originally I thought of it as a trilogy, focusing on hope, faith, and love, and on those three stones. But once I figured out that the stories, I came up with this concept of these evil stones of fear, doubt, and lust that hunt the good stones. And once I came up with these 6 stones, and then the 7th stone is the stone of destiny, I suddenly decided that it couldn't just be a trilogy. Each stone had to have its own story. So that's how it came about to be 7 stones. But to bring all this folklore and this magical fantasy of the Fae, and to bring it into the human realm and have those things interact, and how they bring about true love within these characters and how that comes about, that's what really started putting the whole thing together for me.
I know when a lot of people think about writing a book, it seems very overwhelming, and they might sit down and they type a word or two and stare at the screen for quite some time. How overwhelming was it for you, or not, to go ahead and plan out that we're doing 7 books really before you even got started?
I figured it was 7 books halfway through the first book. To answer your question about, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed? First off, I've told stories my whole life. And, to me, it's very natural to tell a story. I've always, ran my mouth, told stories, told funny things. I've always been told I'm a great storyteller. I've always wanted to write. And I did start writing in my 30s. And, it wasn't good. I don't think I was mature enough to do it. It takes a certain amount of maturity and self-awareness and self-sense to really sit down and pour something out like that. How to get organized, that's a tough one because you do get flabbergasted. And I think my greatest asset is my performing arts background, because I take and I view the characters, they're my little players. They're my little dancers. They're my little actors. And I'm the director or choreographer. And this is my play. This is my screenwrite. This is my play. This is something I'm putting together. And it becomes, once you start breaking it down like that, it becomes very easy to sit down and think through every scene. every part, every scene, and you have a big picture in your mind. You always have a big picture in your mind. And that's how it started, the big picture. Oh, I want all these magic stones, and I want this fae, and I want all these stories of true love. And, you know how it begins and you know how it ends. Now you just got to fill in the middle. And that's the fun part. And even when you get stuck, writers don't always, very few of us write in chronological order or the order that the book's going to be. It's like, there's always a scene in the middle. It's like, I want this to happen. And that's going to make the book really cool. And then you're like, well, wait, but then I have to start, because I can't just start there. I got to start somewhere. So then you back up and you're like, okay, so where did this story that brought us to that moment, where did it start? And how did that begin? And how did that come about? And, once you start putting together your characters, every character's got to have a goal. They got to have a flaw. They got to have a weakness. They got to have a reason that they're there, a motive that gets them to where they want to go. They have to be able to make mistakes. And they all do. They all screw up just like we all do. They all have hopes and dreams, and sometimes they come true and sometimes they don't. And, being able to focus on those people as characters, and those characters, as if it not necessarily you, but what would this person who's like this, how would they react in each of these situations? And how would they move forward to achieve their goal or their wants or their desires? And that's how you start unfolding the story, and you start telling it. And there's, it's interesting because that, going back to that performing arts background, I do sit through and I think through each and every scene. And I think through it as it's like, do I want to go this direction? Because if I go that direction and this person says and does this, then here's what the fallout of that direction is. But it's like, no. Because my goal is to get over here. That's where the story is. That's going to drive the story forward. So you kind of, if this person were there and that person, and she's here, he's there, she says this, he says that, this is what's going to happen. And it's going to get me to there. And that's how they react. And that's how I get to that point that moves the story forward. So it all becomes this, it's like little characters I'm playing with. I'm the director. And and not necessarily playing with them, but I'm manipulating them and I'm creating my story. And the greatest part, and I've always said this before, the sweetest part of a story is not only creating it, not only putting it together, not only putting it down on paper, but when the audience or the reader gets the reaction that as a writer I've desired. That's where my sweet spot of storytelling is when I finally get these stories out there and everyone's like, wow, or I felt that, or I cried in that part, or just, that's when I'm sitting there going, that's what I wanted. And that's when I know I'm doing good storytelling. So that's what I like best.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned kind of thinking ahead or thinking through, if this character makes this decision or does this thing, that's going to have these other implications down the road. Do you ever find yourself now doing that in life, in real life, of thinking through decisions, maybe a little harder than you did before?
I know, but who does, and it's so funny because, 99% of us are like, hindsight is 20/20. And you're always like, man, I wish I could have, or, if I would have said this at that time, I could have really, and yeah, especially when you're thinking about an argument, you're like, I should have said this. Yeah. All those things I should have, would have, could have, I put in a book. That's what I put in my book, yeah, it's, and sometimes I put the things that, I wish I hadn't said. That I don't say it, or, but do I do it now? Yes and no. I think I don't think writing, I do think writing it has made me a little bit more aware of what I say and do and how that impact comes across and what it does. I do think raising triplets has had more impact on what I say and do than just the writing, because I had that talent before, because now my kids are older. They're actually 26. So, going through, them and helping them and tutoring them through school. I tutored them all through elementary school, all through junior high, all through high school. And then 2 of them I also tutored through college. So, I spent more time thinking about, do say this and don't say that. Cause, at toddlers, they were little recorders. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many times I got a call from a school going, guess what your daughter said? So yeah, I think it was June. I think it was pre-K. It was pre-K because I hate math. I I can't stand. I failed math. I am an artist. I am not a mathematician. I believe I'd been helping my kids with math, and I started cussing during math. And it was so funny because I got a call from a teacher at pre-kindergarten, and they're doing basic math. 2 + 2 = 4. And my son, apparently, one of the sons, the oldest, had been cussing under his breath during math because I cuss under my breath during math. So the school had to call and go, "Mrs. Izard, I have to call and tell you about your son." It was just, and I have to give you my response because it's such a beautiful, poetic response. And I know you personally will love this because this teacher goes on and on. "Well, we were just so worried. And he just whispered in under his breath. That's no big deal." And, I have to be honest, I could not stand this teacher. And I let her get through her explanation. And at the end of it, I was like, "Well, shit, fucking hell. Can you just believe that he said that? I mean, I just don't know where the fuck he gets that." I mean, I just launched into it. And I'm so, because we talked about cussing or not cussing in our interview beforehand. And I'm so glad we had that opening conversation. I could not have shared this story with you because it is an absolutely hysterical story because this teacher was just, she was just struck silent. There was like dead silent. There weren't even crickets on the other end of the line. It was just, I just don't know where he gets that shit from, And it was just like, oh my. But yeah, that's pre-K. That's one of my favorite stories to tell. But there's a million of them. But yeah, I started being careful, especially when you're just driving. And this is another one. We're just driving, and they're in the car with me, and you're driving down the road and you cuss out some guy that's driving by, and so my kids would spontaneously cuss in the car. Because that's what I did. I cussed in the car. So if they're right. So funny stories. But yes, I am a little bit more careful these days. I do think ahead a little bit more. I think that comes more from the kids than writing.
Well, I love those stories. And that teacher just should have known not to mess with you, I feel like. Let's talk about your kids for just a moment. Mm-hmm. What was it like? One child is difficult enough, when people become parents and they got this one bundle of joy to deal with. How did it feel having 3 bundles of joy to deal with?
Bundles of hell.
All at the same time.
No, it's 2 boys. Okay, so it's 2 boys and a girl. Everyone always asks, 2 boys and a girl. I did have a science teacher come up to me. She was their freshman year of high school. She came up to me and my kids were standing there, 2 boys and a girl, science teacher. And she goes, "Are they identical?" And I'm like, "No, X, Y, chromosome." And again, I was like, science teacher, life science at that. Because that was our freshman year in school. But no, what was it like? I don't have another single child. And so these are all I know, which I think is a blessing. Because I do have friends that have had a single child and then had twins, and they're all just like, "Oh," so I think it's more shocking. When I found out it was triplets, I think I was 16 weeks when I found out it was triplets. And the doctor, I was holding, what to expect when you're expecting. And my doctor said, "You can read the first chapter of that and throw the rest of it away." And that's exactly what it was like. Everything was different. Most of the rules didn't, most of those fundamental rules of raising kids don't apply. You adapt and do what you can in order to cope and deal with what you're given, and a lot of, the only analogy that I can give, and I've given this year after year after year after year, because it's the only way I think I can get people who don't cope and deal with it to understand. And it's the best. I don't know if it's the best analogy. It's the one I can come up with. Okay. You cope and deal with things and it becomes this extra burden. So it's 3, not 1. And 3 at once is more like 4 at once. It's more than just 3 kids. If you have 3 kids that are 2 years apart, having 3 at the same age at the same time is like having 4 that are 2 years apart. It's that, it kind of compounds itself. So, and people are like, "How did you get used to it? How did you deal with it?" And you just get up and do. You get up and go. You get up and do. You just do it, and you quit questioning it. You have to find your time, and I can get to that in a minute. But I want to give the analogy. People who commute, I'm in Houston, and to drive from one side of Houston to the other is 4 hours. In good traffic. Mm-hmm. In good traffic. because it's a good 60, 80, 60, 70, maybe even an 80 when you count the Woodlands down to the furthest tip before you get to Galveston.
Yes.
It's quite large, and that's minus traffic. I live in West Houston, so in order for my husband to go to work, he drives on the largest freeway in the world, which is the Katy Freeway. I think it's like 9 lanes at one point. Commuting to work. If you commute for more than an hour to work and an hour from work, okay, that's a burden. Excuse me, it's a burden. You kind of, you try and get used to it. You cope. You listen to a podcast. You play some music. And I've had to, before I had the kids, I had to commute long distances to work, and my husband does as well. So you kind of come up with these coping mechanisms that you sort of adjust yourself and get comfortable in order to do these things. And you never realize how hard the burden is until you don't have the burden anymore. You're like, wow, I can't believe I did that. That's kind of where I'm at, because the kids are 26, and it's like, wow, I can't believe I, bottle fed 3, and we got up at 2 and 4 and 6, and it's kind of, you're kind of like, I did that, and it's like, you just find your coping mechanisms during the moment, and you just deal, and you can't let it get to you. One of the other coping mechanisms we had was that once we got them to a point where at least 2 of them could sleep through the night, we started having what we called hobby night. And so there was hobby night and date night, and then there was family night. So hobby night, so we split Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. And so the person who didn't have hobby night, the kids, they were on kid duty that night. So they were the one that had to get up and feed the one that still had to be fed, which was the daughter, who was much smaller when she was born. She was 3.5 pounds at birth. The boys were 4 pounds each. So they were, and they were in ICU, and they were pretty puny, but they came home and they grew, and they're not puny anymore. Oh, they hit that 12-year-old mark, and it was just like, I'm going to eat everything in the house. It was just, and I do have, I took pictures of the grocery cart that was, just laden full that I pushed through. But no, they, we had the hobby night, and, you were off that. You didn't have to do anything. And then date night was Friday night. And, this is, if I date myself, I did say the kids were 26, but, we'd walk through the mall on Friday night, and then we'd go to dinner, and they were, infants, toddler kind of age. And so that was good for them. And then, we'd hang out Saturday, and then Sunday night was family night, and we'd have some family over for dinner. But, the Monday through Thursday, we split, and we split it apart. And that really helped our sanity, I think, is because it wasn't constantly both of you getting up each night. And we continued that hobby night all the way through, probably through elementary school. And that really helped.
I love that you mentioned, you're faced with something and you just figure it out. You figure out what to do. How else has that served you in your life to kind of learn that, or maybe rediscover it with the 3 kids? Where else has that come into play and served you well?
Well, even before I had the kids, I've studied dance since I was 3 years old. That's studying dance, and even acting, because, studying these things, it's an art that you have to study. Not everyone has the art, but it is a craft that you have to constantly work on. And writing's the same. It's a craft that you have to work on. It's something that you are, once you learn to do it, you keep studying it. I've danced since I was 3. I was a professional dancer at 19, 20. And I still did not know I knew a lot about dance. I still didn't know a lot that I needed to. And I learned more teaching as I got older, into my 30s, and now into studio and started teaching. I even learned more about dance then. But there's instant feedback. You're in class, you're studying, you're working, and there's a teacher, depending upon which teacher I had, it was a teacher that was really nice. And now let's make sure. Or, the Russian teacher was, you will do, pounder king on the floor. Yeah, well, don't do, So I had a number of different teachers, but the point is the feedback is instant, and your correction has to be instant. It has to come at that moment. And so I spent a very big part of my life wearing skimpy leotards and tights, staring at my reflection in the mirror, going, okay, that part's not right. And this part, no, suck this in, no, put this over, and just self-analyzing. And being able to adjust and to adapt and to take that criticism in and still be positive and to be able to change it at that moment and perform it and execute it instantaneously. I think that really prepped me for those adjustments and those, accommodating my life and whether it was a nice teacher or a mean teacher and trying to work through those things, because I always felt that everything they gave and everything they said was there to improve me, was there to help me, was there to improve me. And, I also, I talk a lot to writers about, they talk about how do you accept criticism and how do you handle that? And I learned that I didn't learn this until adulthood. And I wish I would have learned this earlier, but, feedback is a gift, and everyone's like, I hate feedback. Oh, the criticism. Oh, in every criticism is something that's trying to make you feel better, not feel better, but do better. Mm-hmm. And every criticism is something that is saying, you know what, this is an adjustment you can make and it'll make your writing better. It'll make your life better. It'll make your dancing better. It'll make, and so I think that in that approach and that concept of being able to accept criticism and to make change, that makes you adaptable. You are a person who can be molded, who can adapt, who can work well, who can take any situation or anything and make it work. And I learned that part of criticism I learned early on, and that really helped with the kids, because it was like there were some days, it was like they were all screaming. You're like, okay, that's what we're doing today. We're all screaming today. So you just go with them, and you just go, the interesting thing is, when you got 3 toddlers screaming, when you scream back at them and they all suddenly shut up, it's just really funny. So, and I learned that the hard way. But it's you learn how to adapt, and you just and you have to keep a positive light on it. You almost have to laugh at it. It's just like, if they're all screaming, you scream with them, and you have to laugh at that, because it's mm-hmm. That's life. And so, and like I said, you just figure it out, and you got to make it work, and you just go with it.
Some days you just kept them alive, and that was a check mark. You know what I mean?
Right. The house was messy, but we're here.
Did not die. So,
yes.
All of the work that you have done in dancing and art forms and writing is very personal, I feel like. So when you think about criticism of that, even though it is there to make you better, is it any more difficult to receive, than if you just went into an office and you were there stapling papers and they said, oh, that staple, is a little bit too far this way, too far that way. And you're like, fuck, whatever, it's a staple. I don't really care. So you take that criticism and you staple straighter. I don't know. But is it more difficult to receive that criticism when it's really something coming from your heart?
When I was younger, it was. And I think that's why I wasn't ready to write in my 30s. I think in my, that's when, when I talked about maturity and being able to take that, like I said, I started dancing at 3. And so I knew what criticism was. I knew what I was supposed to do with it. I knew that there were times I didn't like it. There were times I argued with teachers. I was not always the best of student. I'm a very outgoing, outspoken person who has a very set place in her mind of where she falls in this world. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't always right. And the younger I was, it was harder to hear that. And the older I got, it was easier to place it in the right place. Sometimes it still gets personal. I'm trying to formulate the answer. So, because, the first book, it is my, all these books, they are my stories. Mm-hmm. They are of my creation. Even before this, I did a lot of choreography. When I owned a studio, I did a lot of choreography in college. Those were also my stories. Those were also very personal to me, because they were a part of myself sharing with other people, whether it's a story through movement and in dance, or whether I'm writing something, or even in acting, it's a story through what I'm doing in acting. And the younger you are, the harder it is to assimilate your criticism and to not take it so personally. When I first started writing 4 or 5 years ago, and I first started taking this really seriously and sat down and said, that's it, I'm going to do it. I had a different mindset, but even then it was very difficult not to take it personally. It's like, well, I've poured my heart into the story and my heart and soul and everything that I want to do for the story. But I I did reach a point where I kind of flipped it a little bit, because it's like, if what I want to say isn't coming across to the reader, I'm not writing it right. And that's why I talk about the sweet spot of the story is the reader's reaction is what I desired their reaction to be, because that means I told the story correctly, or I wrote it in the right way, or I wrote it in a way that all readers could understand it, or majority. But, so I kind of flipped it a little bit in when people were saying, I just don't get this, or I just don't understand that, or I don't like this part of your story. It was, then I'm not writing it right. I'm not telling it right. And so I would go back and look at it, and 9 times out of 10, they were right. I hadn't written it right. I hadn't told the story right in order to get the reaction I desired. So, it's still hard to take, but I do have a flip on it to where I can make it a positive.
Which is really hard for a lot of people to do, no matter what they're dealing with when it comes to criticism. So is there any advice that you would give, just generally speaking, when you're receiving ideally constructive criticism, and if people aren't giving it constructively, then it's not always good, but anything that you would tell people when they're receiving that constructive criticism, how to kind of depersonalize it so that you can accept it more freely?
Well, first off, any criticism that's given on any work that you've done, the reason you think it's personal is because it's your work. Okay. What you need to, it's almost compartmentalized, but it's really the reality of criticism. When they criticize your work, they're not criticizing you. Criticizing you is your eyes are ugly. Okay. But criticizing, I don't believe, you wrote about this woman. I'm trying to come up with the best example that relates to your eyes are ugly. You wrote about this woman, and she has glorious blonde hair, but you forgot the color of her eyes. And I just can't see her face. I just don't understand her at all. And part of that is that I didn't give all the description. I didn't give it, but what you have to understand is that criticism of what you wrote isn't a criticism of you. It's a criticism of what you wrote. In that criticism is a message that says, I didn't understand, or I didn't get, or I don't see this. And that's not personally criticizing you, or, someone says, oh, your mother sucks. And I'm like, well, does she? My mother doesn't, but I think my mother's pretty damn cool, but once again, criticizing my mom isn't criticizing me. It's just going to piss me off, but, you just have to understand. You have to understand the origin of the criticism and what exactly they're criticizing. What makes it personal is that they're criticizing your work. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it personal. And you have to be able to just, you kind of have to separate that a little. And I think a lot of that comes from that dancing, teachers would come by and criticize me for what I was doing. They were criticizing my body. They were criticizing where it stood, where the weight was, whether it looked good, whether it didn't look good. Was my toe pointed? Was the weight forward on my foot like it was supposed to be? Was it back? Was it sitting back? And, was it, and it's like, and every criticism a dance teacher gave started with you aren't doing this right. You aren't doing that right. And they're always, you aren't, and it's always you. And that's a very personal statement because it's directed at you, but it's really your body and your execution they're criticizing. It's not you personally. And, finding that division is very difficult, but it's very freeing when you do.
I would like to go on record right now and say that both of our moms are hella cool. Like, I don't know your mom, but if you say she's cool, she's cool. And my mom is also cool. So anybody, just don't talk about our moms because they're super, super badass, super cool ladies. Right. We have talked about a lot of different art forms today. I want to talk about one additional type of art form of which you have a little less familiarity, and that is tattoos. Mm-hmm. So I do have on short sleeves today. So I have a lot of tattoos. Cool. I know that you don't have any tattoos. However, you've spent some time in tattoo shops. You have supported others as they have received tattoos. You've witnessed tattoos in all kinds of places. not on the body necessarily, but, in your art forms and
But I
things
have.
in your life, but also in all kinds of places.
Yes, I have.
You don't have any, but if you were going to get one, so let's say we're taking out all of the conventional issues. So it's going to be free. You will be able to snap your fingers and make it disappear on cue, and it will not hurt. So with these parameters in mind, what tattoo are you getting and where are you putting it?
I have always wanted a heart tattoo at the very top of my buttocks, right at the top of the crease. And,
okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the heart. And then, but I've always wanted the heart tilted. And I actually use a graphic in some of my marketing. It's on actually my recipe card for Stone of Love that goes out with the signed book. But there's a graphic that's similar to what I would probably put, which is a heart. And then the right side of the heart is doubled. So it has two lines there. And it's very stylized and curved and, very feminine and not necessarily bold, heavy lines, probably something that starts, I also have a minor in art. I have a minor in English and a minor in art. But so it would probably start thin and then the lines would start thin, get thicker, and then curve around and thin out as they sort of swirly, but a swirly sort of thing. Swirly girly sort of thing, probably in red.
Very feminine, very contoured. I like how it kind of follows the lines of the body.
Yeah.
I love that. If there were a magical way that they wouldn't be permanent, is this something you would consider?
Oh, yeah. I've considered it before. They are, we've talked about this. They're so permanent. And I did see during college, I saw someone I worked with. I saw the aftermath of burning off a tattoo off of her arm. And she spoke about how painful it was. She was a waitress. She was having to carry a tray and, and it's not a pretty sight. And it was kind of, because, at first you're like, oh, I could always have it taken off, it's just, and you think it's no big deal, but it is a big deal. Now, of course, this was back in the 80s. I don't know if I know that the technology is still very similar, but I don't know if the execution and the recovery with technology has anything, have any improvements been made? I don't know. I don't want to test it. I've tested so many other boundaries in my life. I just don't know if that's something, if that's something I want, I personally, as far as, I do always think about pain management. Which is interesting. I've had back surgery. I've had a major back surgery. I have a full fusion between lumbar 4 and 5, where they took out a disc, fused the two vertebrae, and then grew them together over a period of time. And there's still screws and pins back there. So I don't twist and shout like I used to. I don't bend like I used to. I just don't. I used to be a gymnast for a short time. So I can't, I can still do back bends, still do cartwheels, but I can't quite bend. But, I understand pain management. I understand pain levels, pain management, recuperation. And, I just don't want to add another medical recovery to my dossier. I had to have a C-section, to get pregnant. I had to have 2 surgeries. I had to have 2 corrective surgeries just to get pregnant. Had the C-section, had to recover from the triplets. Part of that recovery was not necessarily being able to recover all of the support in my abdominal muscles that I used to have as a dancer. And that was a big part of what contributed to my back injury. I've broken every toe at least once dancing. I've injured my knees, my ankles. I've had surgery on the left knee because I blew it out skiing New Year's Day one year. That was not fun. That was the kids were with us. But it's I just don't want to add another thing to the dossier, the medical dossier.
I can totally relate, as I also have a dossier. So I love that you called it that. So I can relate to that. I have a friend, her name's Shay. She's been on this podcast before. She works for a company that does lasering. And so I don't think technology has improved a lot when it comes to the pain. It's still very painful. There are colors, some that are better than others to even be successful in trying to take it out. Black is the best. I can't remember the rest of the sequencing, but it's a lot to think about. So I get it. Where can people find you? So if they want to grab your book, if they want to kind of see what's coming up next, you talked about kind of the future progression of what is coming. If they want to talk to you about back surgery, or if they just want to come to Houston and drive, Woodlands all the way to Galveston with you, where can they find you?
I don't know about driving Woodlands to Galveston. We can go West Houston to Galveston. Galveston is a favorite vacation spot of ours. Actually, my website is margaretizardauthor.com. It's MargaretIzard author.com. All my socials are Mizard Author, which is MIZARD author. So whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, that's where you can find me. My first two books, Stone of Love and Stone of Fear, are on Amazon now. Stone of Love released March 4th. You can actually buy it now. Stone of Fear releases June 12th. So based upon when we're recording, it's on pre-sale now, but June 12th, it'll be available. And you can get an ebook, or you can go ahead and order a print copy. It's print on demand from my publisher, Wild Rose Press. But you can always find me at my website, margaretizardauthor.com.
Love it. Well, as I noted when we started, we have blown through some time and gotten nowhere. So we have so much more to discuss. I hope that you will consider coming back for a second and probably a third appearance so that we can chat a little bit more about your writing. We got to get into the paranormal. We got to talk about editing. Like, we have a lot to discuss, Margaret. We have a lot to discuss. So I hope that you will come back. I am so grateful that you spent some time with me here today and shared what you did about everything that you've been working on. I'm excited to start reading your book. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at strongenoughpod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.